Hi everyone, welcome to the MKLCX podcast, which is called Eat Your Own Dog Food. And today I've got a very special guest with me, Michael Bartlett, which I'm massively chuffed about. Michael has got a special book out, haven't you? So we'll talk about that in a moment, but Michael comes from the US. Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Southwest Missouri, it's where I'm based.
Okay, so on the MKLCX web podcast, we talk about leadership, customer experience, and employee experience. And Michael's book ticks every single one of those boxes, which is why I was really keen to have Michael as a special guest. So I was having a look at your LinkedIn profile and also the stuff. And we've only ever spoken on LinkedIn, haven't we? Though we've spoken lots on LinkedIn about baked beans and all sorts. I was looking through going, oh, okay. Some quite deep stuff from kind of neuroscience and psychology to what we were doing at uni and all sorts. But some really inspiring conversations. But so you had a record label at the age of 16, which I don't know anybody else who's ever said that to me. You have had a film production company that was really successful. And the way that I first came across you was from the CCXP exam simulator, where that is still the go-to tool that anybody needs if they're doing CCXP, the customer experience exam. So that's how I first came across you. And the thing that I especially like about you, Michael, if I may say, is not only do you have your values on your LinkedIn, which I can see in front of me here on my iPad that I've got under the table, but also you really live that on every single post that I see, from all of the royalties that come through your book. You use to rescue dogs, don't you? And your own dogs have come through that route as well.
That's right, yes.
From taking them from kind of kill shelters and all the rest of it. And I just love how you just put those values out there. And again, with this second book, is it your second book? Have you got?
That's correct. It's my second book.
You're doing the same, aren't you? You're using the funds from this as well.
Oh, yes.
More dogs.
Yes, summers are very difficult. We always struggle in summers. Last year, I had 2 dogs that I wouldn't have in any other circumstance been able to help them, because summers, everybody goes on vacation. So all the vets that I work with, all the boarding houses are all full. And I had this, and these 2 dogs are actually mentioned in the appendix of the new book, a big black and white pit bull named Maggie, and then a slightly smaller brown dog named May. And just by the grace of God, someone contacted me and said, would you be willing to build a prototype for me of a product? And I'll pay you $2,500 to do it. And I was like, yep. And then I took the $2,500, and that's exactly what it cost to board them at a specialist trainer. They didn't really need specialist training. One of them kind of did, but it was more that they just had a roof over their head so I could pull them out of that kill shelter. And I said, you have to rely on just luck like that in the future. Book is going to be specifically used to generate money for June, July, August, September every year, because that's when it gets really, really bad. And then at least that way we'll be able to afford to put them at maybe some of the more expensive boarding facilities just to save their lives. And then it all quietens down in the winter and we move them on to happy homes.
Brilliant. So you've got a whole cycle going of bringing in the funds and how you're going to use it. Excellent. I love it. So tell me a bit about your book. So I've obviously read it and think it's amazing. Otherwise I wouldn't be talking to you. I'd have gone, thanks, but I'm quite busy. Not really. But so when we talked about it, you said it's kind of the science behind good and bad customer experience. There's neuroscience in there. There's psychology in there. There's some of your personal experiences. What I also really liked was how you've referenced so many other CX experts and particular books and papers, which you don't often see. You might see sort of models and stuff like that, but you have gone out of your way to reference other people so that someone who can go and have a look and just read up for themselves. So kind of you've kind of gone, you don't have to take my word for it. You can go and do your own research. And when we talk about research, this has taken you 3 years, hasn't it, to do all of this research? But actually you wrote it all and got it ready for publish in like a month.
Yeah, and I wasn't even planning on writing it. I had the illustrations done in the end of 2019. And then I just forgot about it in 2020. I always wanted to get back to it. I actually did a video for the CXPA where I talked about the concepts in the book. And that video may have came out in March 2020. And I think in that video, I said I'll be bringing these concepts to the table soon. And then 2020 went by, and then 2021 looked like it was going to go by. And of course, I was on the startup. So I was really busy working on the startup. And then right near the end of 2021, you happened to mention that you were writing another book. And I said to you, well, how on earth do you find the time to do this? And somehow that little discussion ended up, one little domino moving created a chain reaction, and suddenly the book is finished. Well, not finished, but pretty much almost done in December. And it was an incredible ride. So I got you to thank for the pushing that first domino for me.
Oh, no, you're very welcome. Yeah, because we were accountability partners, weren't we?
That's right.
Yeah. So I've read it. As I say, I found it absolutely fascinating. Tell the listeners just a bit around what made you decide to go for this? What gem made you think, do you know what, I'm going to write a book?
Well, I started noticing, the science has really backed it up now lately, but back in 2018, I started noticing that customer experience the discipline seemed to be fizzling out a little bit. It seemed to evolve, and then it just seemed to stop and go in circles, and the circles were always the same thing. So I was hearing the same things repeated over and over again. And I found it was all very positive. It was all about, here's the things you can do to make the customer experience better. These are things that you can do to improve the lives of your employees. But again, it was all very samey. And so I think new people coming into the field will get a lot of value from that. But I think if they just blindly implement a lot of those ideas, they may be in for a hard wake-up call, because unless you address the negative aspects that can crop up in customer experiences as well, it doesn't matter how many good experiences you have. And I'll use the classic example, which is, think of a marriage. I mean, no person has loyalty or love of a business what two people have when they get married. There's so many marriages fail, and because it's ultimately got really nothing to do with all those wonderful experiences that lead up to that. It's the day-to-day experiences after you get married. Are they good enough to keep you going, or are some of them negative enough to destroy everything? So all that hard work could be completely ruined by one or two really bad negative experiences with the business. So really now the science is showing that negative emotions get processed much faster and more impactful than positive emotions. Negative feedback gets processed faster in the brain than positive feedback, and it's linked to our our innate ability that we just want to survive. So we're more worried about negative things because they can kill us. Well, at least they would have 90,000 years ago. Yeah. Whereas positive things, they're great, but that we don't have to worry about them so much. So that's why there needs to be a focus on the negative side of customer experience as well. And we need to, it's a bit like when someone suffers from an illness and they don't know what it is, and then when they finally get the diagnosis, even if it's really bad, there's still some relief there because at least they know what they're dealing with. So it's a bit about naming the enemy, and then once you've named the enemy because you can see it, then you can go about destroying it. So that's kind of the approach, the patterns in my book.
And I really like what you've written just at the start in your preface. You said it's intended as a palate cleanser to spark debate and ideation in a field that has stagnated of late, which was exactly what you were saying there about CX. And you're right, a lot of books that I've read CX, you kind of get some real gems in some of them, but often they're the same kind of content in a different layer. And you talk about moments that matter, and then let's look at the path less traveled. Let's look at the dark side of CX and look at moments that shatter. And I really like that. That was the first thing you wrote, and it grabbed me already. I highlighted it in yellow because I thought, yeah. Tell us about the what's the word?
Oh, the preomes.
That's it. Tell us about those, because I'd never come across this concept before, and I loved how you told me how to pronounce it as well, and then I probably forgot. But kind of you put all of that in there to help us go, well, what are these? I've never come across it. Tell the listeners what that's about.
So a preome, I learned the term in 2014. A preome is a Russian word, and it represents a concept, which is a pattern and then an associated maneuver. So in the game of chess, there are certain patterns that crop up over and over again. And it's all well and good being able to recognize them, but you need to know what to do when you see them. So you learn the pattern, and then you say, when I see this pattern, I know I need to do the following, and that way I can bring an advantage in the position. Grandmasters know hundreds, if not thousands, of these positions. There's many books written on them that catalog them as well. I remember from about the year 2002, without even knowing this was a real thing, I started cataloging. I've got a whole folder of positions that I would print off, and then I would mark them up with, analysis as to, this is a particular kind of position, and here's how you solve it, how you bring about an advantage. So clearly I'd seen the idea of patterns early, but then I didn't realize the Russian chess masters already knew this stuff. And I thought to myself, maybe this can be applied to customer experience, because there are certain negative experiences that pop up all the time. We all know them. We all talk to each other about them, and they're all very familiar. And if they keep coming up over and over and over again, normally when a pattern happens often, it's because the same root causes tend to create the pattern, but also the pattern tends to then have similar characteristics that can be solved. So you can almost make a prescription. Now, it's never 100%. Every business is unique and different. So one particular negative pattern may have slightly different root causes in that business, and you might need to do slightly different things to fix it. But in general, there's a generality that if you see pattern X, make maneuver Y, and that will realize you an advantage. Kind of like the Pareto principle. About 80% of the time, it should probably hold true. So I decided to catalog those patterns, and that's essentially what the book does. It gives you a primer on the psychology of bad experiences, and then we just go through each chapter is a new preamble, one after the other. Occasionally we'll make a little diversion. We'll talk about culture here and there, maybe rewards and recognition when we feel we need to deep dive a little bit more, but it's just mainly like 80% of the book is just a compendium of all of the patterns, and they're not exhaustive. There's 18 of them, but they are certainly the most common patterns that will crop up in bad customer experiences.
And I could relate to every single one of them, actually. Roadblock was the one I just thought, how many times that happened to me, when I've literally, you get this kind of computer says no moment, and they just look at you and you're like, okay, so now what? And you gave that example, didn't you, in the book, about wanting to use your debit card and they would only take credit cards. And thankfully you had someone with you who would step in. But what would have happened if you didn't, kind of that road. But so I really like those kind of concepts that you've laid out here, where you've gone, actually these kind of things can happen. This is an illustration, so it sticks in your mind, and this is how it can feel. This is what it looks like in a real life experience, like that one you just said with the credit card. And then you've gone, and when this does happen, these are the practical things that you can do to get rid of these.
Yes.
Of them. So it's got, as a model, it's a nice way to read a book, and it's only, I think it was 113 pages. I haven't quite got the published version, but it's quick to read. And I love it when I get loads of light bulb moments in a book, either moments where I go, no idea what that is, I haven't seen that before, this is helpful and enlightening, is going to grow me, or where I go, yes, they're so right. And there was so many bits through there like that. So out of those, which is your favorite? Which one of those, kind of the 18, really kind of sticks in your mind as the worst one?
I don't know if there's a worse one or not. I mean, Roadblock certainly is very frustrating because it's pure goal friction at its finest. One that I like the most and talk about the most is what I call the overly long waits, because it's one of those patterns that is, you can fix it operationally and probably spend a lot of money, or you can fix it psychologically, which is a lot cheaper. And it just gets the conversation going with customer experience practitioners that just because something is broken operationally doesn't mean that that's the only place that you should look for a solution, because the whole point of customer experience is the whole concept, the whole phenomena is psychological. So if you can make something feel not as bad as it actually is, then it really isn't that bad, because it's the experience that matters for the customer. So I go into the idea of psychological interventions versus operational intervention in that pattern, and that allows me to open up the conversation there. So that's probably my favorite one, and I enjoyed writing that the most because I was able to reference a really interesting new book that came out, boredom and negative emotion signals within the body as well. So it just allows me to talk about something that's interesting, but bring a little bit of the science into it while I'm at it as well.
Yeah, I know. I actually looked up the Could we talked about the different statuses, didn't you? So exploration, belonging, certainty. Sorry, excuse me. Those different kind of human needs, and the
Yes.
boredom was a big one because we want to explore. I'm definitely someone who wants to explore, so I'm having to stand for any period of time, get so bored. I did read in one of your chapters about that song being on hold.
Mhm.
I hadn't heard of it, so I listened to it. I thought, actually,
Oh,
it's quite
excellent.
a clever way of actually kind of when someone does have to be on hold, kind of calling it out in a bit of a cheerful way to try and go,
Yes.
no,
Mhm.
here we go again, but actually it's slightly different, as you say, kind of putting a different kind of slant on it.
Yeah, the human needs are very interesting. So, for example, there's been a massive, massive boom in America. I'm sure you've probably had it in England as well, with people wanting to buy RVs and go traveling all over the
Mm,
country. And the
yeah,
reason is because our innate need to explore and our innate need to have control were both suppressed really for the last 2 years. And
yeah.
when you suppress those needs, they're pent up and you want to rebalance them. So immediately people will push back, and that will normally represent itself in buying patterns. And so yeah, that's why if you've got the money and you can afford it, a lot of people have been going out and getting RVs.
I also liked how you talked about those different experience dimensions. So the goal friction and the social friction. So I knew them as kind of, we're stopping somebody get to their goal or their mission. So what is their mission? And okay, we're stopping them. That's really frustrating not to be able to hit their mission and come off the phone. But actually you talked about the two as goal friction and social friction, how sometimes you can have both at the same time, and just feel like, what on earth is going on here? I'm just trying to do this and I'd just like to be treated properly, and this and this has happened and I'm never ever coming back. It was really interesting to see it written like that.
Yeah, goal friction and social friction. I created those because I didn't want practitioners to have to remember the whole model of exploration, belonging, status, certainty, autonomy. It's a lot to carry around in your head. And then how do you even use that when you're analyzing an experience? I want people to be able to think on their feet when they're analyzing. And actually, if you can cluster everything into those two boxes.
Yeah.
Either the experience has goal friction, or it has social friction, or it has both. I don't know of any bad customer experience that has neither. I don't know of any bad customer experience that has anything else. So that's the easiest way to think about them when you're analyzing an experience or you're auditing your experiences, so that you can look to improve them.
Body budget, that was another one as well. I thought, never heard of that, but actually that very much comes into kind of boredom, or actually like, I've got a set amount of time in my day and I need to get something sorted. Do I try and use the chat function while I'm trying to rush around cooking dinner on Zooms, or do I wait till tomorrow and try and ring up somebody? What's going to be quicker? Do I try the local shop and do it that way? What's the best option to get it resolved quickly? And that kind of effort that we put in and the choices that we make, and then go, actually, is that the right decision? No, it wasn't the right decision. I've been standing here for 40 minutes. I should have just rung.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to us a bit more about kind of that body budget bit and how that works for CX.
So basically, the reason that bad experiences irritate us essentially comes down to us trying to predict everything in our environment. So we may not think we're doing it, but we do. So when you go to a restaurant and you sit down and you order your food, you don't like place a timer or look at your watch and say, okay, it's been 5 minutes, I'm really annoyed now. There is not really a specific amount of time. It's based on just your general experiences over life that have taught you this is acceptable, this is unacceptable. And you'll be absolutely fine for however it is. And then you'll suddenly hit a point, you'll start to feel a bit fidgety, like, and then the fidgetiness starts to turn into irritation, and you'll be looking around trying to make eye contact. And that's basically the point where your prediction engine is starting to go off the rails. What you thought it should take, it's taken longer. And we don't remember experiences that match our predictions. We don't need to remember them. There's no evolutionary advantage for that. But if an experience doesn't match, then mistake, we've budgeted our resources incorrectly, and we need to remember that. So that's why we remember bad experiences. It's also why we remember good experiences. And the reason is because throughout history, from the very first life form to both you and I, there is an unbroken chain of 100% success of animals that were able to predict their environment correctly, predict what was going to happen, and it allowed them to survive at least long enough to reproduce. So there's a massive evolutionary advantage to being able to predict your environment. Of course, we live in a completely different world now that our brains weren't originally optimized for, but the wiring's still there. That's why when we don't predict things around us, it really infuriates us, and that's the importance of the body budget.
On my big birthday that I had recently, I went to stay at a boat hotel in London, and we sat in the hotel bar, because they'd sent us straight from reception to the bar, and I don't know, we sat there for about an hour and a half, and we should have checked in for quite some time ago. And I was so bored, I actually took a selfie of me looking at the mirrored glass on the ceiling. Like, oh, come on. And I was getting more and more frustrated because it felt like a money-making gimmick to me. And you talk about kind of money grabbing and that kind of, kind of making somebody feel like actually they are there for their wallet. You mentioned in that shop, didn't you, how you felt like your wallet was being undressed.
Oh God, I'll never forget that. That was weird.
Yeah, where it's not about that kind of relationship building or that long-term partnership with somebody anymore. It's all about kind of that, what can I get out of this customer? And it felt exactly like that. While I was sitting bored, I just thought, right, we should have checked in over an hour ago. No one else has checked in either, and this hotel is running around giving everyone very expensive drinks in the bar, making quite a lot of money on this, with a fee on every single receipt as well for service.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, this feels like a bit of a, this is more of a tactic here to be money making.
Yes.
And then when I got into the hotel room as well, like my husband had bought me some special packages, and they were about 10 times what I would have expected them to be. So lovely that he did it, but that kind of just, built on those moments. And had I not been bored, I probably wouldn't have picked up on those moments, had they just taken me straight to the room. I had those same kind of thoughts about that hotel. I definitely won't ever go back, because number one, I was bored out of my mind and felt like it was some sort of money grabbing gimmick. Number two, there was nothing really that swayed me enough to make up for that. And you talk, don't you, in the book around kind of the, you get so many, and there can be little moments.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
That kind of sway you one way, and then never going back.
So basically, our it's only a theory presently, although there is some good research to back it up. But basically, the theory comes from another researcher who found that so when we learn concepts, like let's say when we learn what a dog is when we're like 3 years old, we need to attach that to some prior concept that we have in our mind. You don't just conjure something like that out of nowhere. It might be that you understand what a living organism is, that it has legs and arms, and then you see an animal like a horse, and then you need to bolt these things on so that you can learn progressively in the world, because you only really have a few primal constructs when you're born, and you sort of form those early on. So we think, the researcher thinks, that our sense of fairness, when it kind of gets created, it bolts onto an existing construct, which is our sense of sensory balance. And it makes a lot of sense. So sensory balance is very interesting. So my wife has a knee injury, which causes her kind of like, would cause it to lean one direction slightly, but our eyes don't like that. Our eyes always have to be completely level. And so in order to make sure that our eyes are level, our body will subconsciously readjust another part of the body, which then caused my wife to have some sciatic pain in one of her hips to reorient itself, because the body always and the mind always wants to find sensory balance. So if you take that to fairness and you take that into the customer experience, if something feels unfair, then you feel a need to regain the fairness in one way or another. Maybe you make a complaint and then the person makes it right. But unfortunately, sometimes the unfairness can become so unbalanced. We just have enough and we say, you know what, I'm not doing business with you anymore. But the problem is, not doing business with the company, especially if they say, okay, we don't care, goodbye, it still leaves the balance unaddressed.
Mm.
And unfortunately, when you have this balance unaddressed, that's what's called resentment. And you still want to right it. And so you end up holding on to that balance, wanting to readdress it. And customers will then start to engage in very negative and destructive behaviors until they feel that things are right again. And so a close friend of mine told me, I told him his story, and he told me the other day, he said, when I was a teenager, so this is going back like maybe 10, 15 years for him, he bought a game console. And he said he took it home just from a local store and it didn't work. He plugged in nothing. It was just completely dead. And they refused to give him a refund. So what he did, because he could do this as a teenager, is he stood outside their store from opening hours to closing hours every day for a week. And every single person that came into the store, he told them what had happened to him. And finally, because I said to him, well, what made you decide to stop doing that in the end after a week? Did they give you a refund? He went, no, they never wanted to work with me. He said, I just got bored and then I went home. And I figured what had happened is he'd probably gotten enough out of his system where he felt he'd readdressed the balance.
Yeah.
He felt like the situation was now concluded and he could move on with his life. But that sense of balance is something all businesses should always be aware of. Absolutely.
Yeah. As you say, it could be something massive,
Yeah.
like with the console. Or it could be some small bits that kind of you keep brushing off, and then you just go, do you know what? I've had enough. You're making it way too difficult to be your customer. I shouldn't be like this. I'm off. Yeah. The other bits kind of stood out to me was when you were talking about the equity scale, was you put it into 4: misdeed, mishaps, obligation, and enrichment. Which was around behavior and the receiving of different experiences. Talk to me about that, because I found that fascinating in the equity scale.
Yeah, so that's not my idea. That's the idea that comes from Nick Lender. He wrote The Tangled Mind, and all CX professionals should know about Nick. He's one of the most influential people on my work. So he wrote the book The Tangled Mind. The Tangled Mind is the book that explains all of our primal concepts that everything that we do is sort of bolted onto those primal concepts. He then wrote a more recent book called Imagine Reading This Book. That's actually the name of the book. And the cover is literally the cover of the book with someone's hand getting ready to turn the pages. And basically he was making the case that if you can get people to imagine doing something, they're more likely to actually do it. And that was kind of the central thesis. And then, like, just randomly, maybe with about 20% of the book left, he just throws in this equity scale idea, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. Is how, like when something good happens to you, the kind of behaviors that you might do, because when something really good happens to you, like you win the lottery, something wonderful happens to you, it tips the scale back to you. You feel that everything's really great, so now you want to sort of give back and you want to tip the scale back a little bit. You're always trying to reach this sense of balance. If something bad happens to you, then you want to behave in a sort of a selfish way to even the situation up, which is why a lot of the times when people that lose weight but they don't do it for the right reasons, they see the diet as an imposition on them, and it's like a hardship, and it starts tipping the scale, and eventually they snap and they go on a binge eating, and they eat all the things they shouldn't do. Again, it's just because their body's trying to regain balance. That's all it is. But that's how it sometimes manifests itself in real life. And the worst situation is when you've got a couple and the wife does something and the husband interprets it as a misdeed. So then he tries to right the equity scale selfishly with a misdeed. And then it's a constant going backwards and forwards with the two of them. And those are the most destructive relationships.
Yeah, no, I can well imagine. It was interesting that quite a lot of, well, there was two, I said quite a lot, two, at least two of the preoms in the book were around aviation. That one particular where the passenger was kind of dragged.
Oh yeah.
And you also put in there as well about the kind of the stress, like with your wife trying to get to a family member's funeral and being told, you might not be able to get on because there's a policy in place, and her just being so stressed. I think you just put about half an hour, but she was just really worried on top of everything else that was going on that she wouldn't be able to make it to a funeral. And I just that kind of thing just really just makes my blood boil when you think that's definitely you called it kind of policies and process over customer, but that's that's greed, isn't it? Really, that's kind of like we're going to oversubscribe tickets so that we can guarantee we're going to be full. And if we have to drag customers off, well, we have to drag customers off, and that's horrendous. And that's definitely a moment that shatters, because that's the worst kind of scenario. It's the grief and the stress and the worry and the prep and the emotions of getting ready for, a flight, especially a flight where it's a loved one's funeral at the end of it.
Yeah.
That's a huge roller coaster. And to have that thrown in the mix and then potentially be thrown off an aircraft is just horrendous. So I read that and thought, oh, I felt it. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, the people that design those experiences blew me away. I mean, okay, fair enough. I suppose I can sort of understand why you might overbook flights if they're never ever full. And then you also leave that small percentage chance that someone might have to be kicked off. But if you wind up in that situation where that has to happen, you need some sort of planning around it and strategy around it, and a way of taking care of people. I mean, I remember one flight I was on, they basically just said, we're just going to pick 4 people at random, which I think is actually what happened to that doctor. He was one of the people that picked random. Picking people at random is not a way to prioritize, because people have different needs and they're on the plane for different reasons. I wish it was just illegal to overbook hotels and overbook flights. Because what are you supposed to do if you overbook a hotel? Where's the person supposed to go? At least overbooking a flight, they can sit in the airport or something. But you overbook a hotel, I mean, that's just cruel, I think. So, yeah, I think we're in a new age now. Now that things are going a bit more viral, we can hold these people to account. Like the guy that was dragged off the plane, the CEO tried to blame him initially, and it was only when the public opinion went completely against them and went viral that they backed down. So at least the public has that on their side now. We can use that against companies when they try to exploit people like that.
Yeah, it's absolutely horrendous. There's so many bits that stuck out for me in this book, and I'm trying to whip through them quick, but there's a lot. What I'm basically saying in listeners is you need to read the book. One of the bits that really stuck out was this cyber terrorism versus kind of customer experience, and you've written about this tension that there is. I do the cybersecurity for our business, and the processes and the extra steps that you have to put in to keep people safe, and you kind of you've got to have multi-factor encryption and a password as long as your arm and all the rest of it, and then you think, right, okay, but I've actually got to get people to remember this, and if I'm telling them it's got to have 10 asterisks on it and got a bit of fruit or something in it as well, how on earth do I kind of keep a customer being able to self-serve but still keep it secure? So I particularly liked that chapter about kind of the kind of unavoidable areas where you have to put security in. There was a topic we were talking about on LinkedIn very recently where someone was saying that there was I think it was a government process in the UK, I think, where you could ring up and report a loved one had died, and it would have a knock-on effect onto all of the different government services. So you didn't have to ring everyone in. And I just thought that's great, because having to ring up over and over and over again and say, this has happened is horrible. But equally, if we didn't have the right security in place, if somebody then rung up and said, oh, actually, Sharon's died, close her account, that would be quite horrendous for me and my loved ones as well. But is something going to happen to me? Well, how has that happened? I'd be really quite annoyed. So you've got to get that balance right, haven't you? And that's quite tough in the CX world, especially in the world of CX and tech.
Yeah, and I was trying to think of a good way to approach this, and I finally solved it. At least I think I solved it. Sometimes to figure it out, you have to look at other places that do it. So for example, like I'm trying to figure out the best way to solve customer experience. So I look at chess, like some completely different field. And so in America right now, we have this whole raging debate over voter ID. And some people are saying, well, voter ID is really bad and loads of people can't vote. And other people are like, well, if we don't have voter ID, then we don't have a secure election. So what do we do? So I did a thought experiment in my head, and it was a bit like the whole, you may have heard it, where someone says, is it better for 10, how does it go? Is it better for 10 innocent people to be locked up and one murderer to go free, that kind of thing. You have to get the balance right. We don't want any murderers on the street, but then we might end up actually convicting some innocent people. And so there's the whole balance there. And so the way that I figured it out is, well, here's what you do. You don't have an election without security. So the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure the security goes up to a point where it's secure. And that's a minimum right to play. Otherwise, what's the point? So you do that. And then once you've got to that point, you then see what the problems are. And people say, well, this person can't get voter ID because they live like 2 miles away from the nearest place. Okay, fine. So we'll address that problem. So we might bring in, some like funds where we can bus people out so they can go to those places to get their IDs. But the security has to come first, because if there's no security, the system is broken, the system can be exploited. So I figured out that's probably the way to do it with CX, is you find out what the minimum right to play is security wise. And then once you've done that, then you pile everything on top of that you can do from CX to make sure that even if some of the experiences are a little uncomfortable, you make them as human as possible. You offer as much help as possible so that someone isn't just completely alienated out of the game and can't get involved. I think that's probably the right way to solve it.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I was thinking about your example that you gave about your kind of the 3 dogs when you turned up at the hotel, and you're only allowed to have 2. That's the same kind of thing, isn't it? Where there's a policy or something that just says no, like security, no. You need to then have these reasonable overrides in place that are secure enough and someone is cautious enough and empowered enough to do them at the right time. There's a reason you can't have 10 dogs in one room, for example. But in the example you gave there, where you needed to be at the hospital, vet hospital the next day with your dog, and you had 3, and you would have to be in your car, and actually the risk level of 3 dogs compared to 2, that's fair for the employee to think, actually, I can override this here. If it's something different and the threat level is very different, they need to be empowered enough to think, actually, no, I've got to be brave here and say no, because the danger and the risk is much higher than having to piss off a customer. So and I think
normally these things come about because there's always one person that ruins it for everybody else. Someone lets like 5 or 6 dogs come in, and then they don't clean up after themselves and the room's trashed. I had a really bad experience I love Indian foods. I'm half Indian, half Irish. So I grew up eating Indian food. And luckily we have it out here in Missouri as well, which is great. Because I was worried when I moved out here if we have it, because obviously in England it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And I went to this buffet, and I normally sit down at the buffet, but my wife and I were rushing on this one day. So we wanted to get a takeaway buffet. And they treated me so badly, I refused to go back to the restaurant now, but they basically made me stand over in the corner while they filled the to-go box. But the problem is I don't eat everything in the restaurant. There's only about 4 or 5 things I eat. And I was treated very, very unprofessionally, let's say, and actually quite abusively. And I went to the other restaurant that I normally go to, and I asked them, and they said, well, we don't do that anymore. Customers were coming in and they were loading up on the full-size chicken breasts, and it was packed so high, like that was not even a box. It was like 8 boxes worth. It's just the top was here, the bottom was here, and they squashed them together. So we had to stop to-go buffets because people were abusing it. And I was like, see, you handled it better. You explained why you can't do it, and then you explained why and apologized. Whereas the other people didn't give me any of that. They were just abusive, and they assumed that I was a bad actor. And again, a few bad customers ruined it for everybody, but the business also has some culpability in the way they react to it as well.
Yeah, and you're right there. The amount of companies that I see that are kind of swayed towards that one bad egg, they've got all their processes around that one thing, that one risk. That we were talking, this is a minor thing, but we were talking recently, again, a LinkedIn conversation around CX, around stickers that are price stickers that are stuck on gifts in a shop. And I did our Christmas hampers for our team over Christmas. So I had, 15, 16 boxes, and I had about 20 gifts in each one, all bought from the same shop over here. And every single one had a really, really ridiculously sticky sticker stuck. And I couldn't, this was meant to be a box from Santa. So I had to sit there and peel off every single sticker and it just drove me crazy. And I'd forgotten about it until I bought something from there again this week. I think it was a candle or something. And it took me and my youngest literally 5 minutes to scratch this sticker off. And the reason, the conversation on LinkedIn was, well, they have to do that because otherwise you might move one price sticker to another one so that you get it cheaper. And I thought, yeah, but
They got barcodes for that.
and every other customer is now being penalized and just scratch it off when they get home. So yeah, you've got to get the balance right, haven't you, with kind of CX against kind of security. But there's some companies that are going way too far and just alienate customers, and it's not right. You've got to use some real common sense on those kind of things. Is there anything kind of, there's so much packed in the book that I feel like I could talk to you for hours about it. But is there anything in particular, what are your favorite bits, or your bits that you just think, if I could tell one person a little gem from my book, what would it be?
Let's think about that. So I suppose the chess analogy works quite well for business strategy as well. So one thing I would want everybody to know is the best way to innovate in business is to follow the greatest innovator of all time, follow their lead, which is natural adaptation. And so the example I give in the book is, if you were to go into an empty room and you were to drop an apple in the room, and you were to drop an ant colony in the room, the vast majority of the ants will find the apple and they will converge on it, but not all of them. There will always be a few that deliberately don't do what everybody else does, and they go off and move. And the reason for that is because eventually this apple is going to run out. And when that apple runs out, that ant colony needs a guaranteed food source, or the whole population will die. So in order for this population to thrive, you need members of that population that think differently, that want to go out and try new things. And so when it comes to business, at the individual level, that's the actual fundamental case for diversity. That's why you want to bring in people that are neurologically diverse, that can see things in a different way, that have different ideas. You want to try and mix your teams up with people that think differently as well. The vast majority of people, yes, they'll probably think the same, they'll do the same things, and that's kind of why you have your branded values, your branded behaviors. But it's always good when you have these other individuals in that do things a little bit differently, because sometimes they can come up with wonderful ideas. And Google exemplified that with the whole 20% work on whatever you want rule.
Love that.
The other thing that when it comes to innovation is from a business level, so from the higher level, what initiatives should the business pursue? And McKinsey has a nice framework that I've put into the book. And their idea is that the vast majority of your initiatives should sustain your business, defend your business, but you should always just have a few that could just go off and maybe just fail and die quietly. But they also could be the next big thing as well. So my employer, JMark, their core business is IT services, but they made a small investment, and that's what they placed me on, is this financial startup. Because if the financial startup dies, it was only a little bit of money for them in the grand scheme of things. If the financial startup blows up, the company could even double or triple its own revenue, and we now have another business the same size as the original business. So innovation is very important. And the final thing to do innovation properly is to build slack into your business. So don't have your teams running at full throttle. Give your teams enough personnel so that the balance of work is about 70-80%, so that people have got breathe to come up with ideas, to think outside of the box, and those should hopefully lead to innovative ideas as well. There's a really interesting book called Alive at Work by Daniel Cable, and he showed in some studies and some case studies how there are some businesses that have done better than other businesses that have their own dedicated R&D departments. These businesses have done better just simply by having a deliberate approach to employee innovation, having little themed events where they ask people to come up with ideas and brainstorm, and then they take one or two of those ideas and run with them. Those have been shown to outperform companies that have dedicated R&D departments. So innovation is the most important thing that we need to be worrying about going into the future. So I thought I'd stress those examples from the book.
Brilliant. And I love those, because if you do get an employee advocating a piece of innovation that transforms the customer and employee experience as well, you also take waste and pain and all the rest of it out of the business, and you get employees that are rooting for something to embed and adopt and innovate. So yeah, it's a win-win all round, that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for coming on, Michael. I really appreciate it. It's been an absolute delight talking to you. Your book's coming out on the 22nd of February, and it'll be on Amazon. And it's called
That's correct, yes.
The Dark Side of CX. Have you got a book cover that you can flash up at anybody? If not, I can put it in there.
Oh yeah, I'll just send you the cover if you want to add it onto the graphics. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yes, it's quite a striking book cover, so you won't be able to miss it. Okay, well, it's been lovely talking to you. Readers and listeners, please go and read the book. I can't stress how good it is. I've read the whole thing twice, because I just went, wah, and it only took me, I think, about an hour and a half to read it once round. So it's something quite, and you will need to kind of take notes or scribble, because there will be thoughts that come at you for definite. So really valuable book. Go and buy it.
Yeah, definitely executives that are on a plane trip, maybe, or something like that. I think it'll be a nice way to pass the time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me on today, Sharon. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to finally meet you as well.
Likewise. Thanks, Michael. Take care.
You too then. Thank you. Bye-bye.